Okay, so let's transition to more of, I'd say, a more complex type demo, right? Where we've gone from raw data in the context of no set of visualizations and just like a basic transactional data model. Now on the data analyst side, what I'd love to show is, can I bring in my own data and show analytics on top of a complex system here in a matter of, we have maybe about 17 or so minutes left. So what I'll go ahead and do is navigate back to my Incorta instance. And this time, rather than actually kind of starting in this Incorta instance itself, what I'd love to do is take a step back and talk through the Incorta Cloud offering. So while I'm sure that Rich kind of uncovered a lot of great value on the Incorta Cloud, if anyone was able to join that session, one of the great things that we can do that he may not have touched upon was this concept of deploying our pre-built blueprint content directly from this kind of centralized spot, right? So what I can do is I can look at this Incorta demo cluster, which I own in our Incorta Cloud admin portal. And what I can do is click on import and install this NetSuite blueprint in real time, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and tenant name, username, and password, same as I had before. And actually I'm gonna keep import sample data off because I'd love to show you how easy it is to not only kind of import the model itself, but in real time go out and actually load that data right before our eyes. So keep in mind, right, if I go back to this instance, hopefully before any of these schemas have been included, right, we have no NetSuite data here. At the end of the day, what we're looking at is accounts receivable data. We have this date dimension in Salesforce, which, by the way, I've actually already brought that Salesforce blueprint in. So sales, finance, marketing, and we're constantly building this out as well. But if I go back to my schema tab, what you're seeing is in real time now I've added my NetSuite accounting, NetSuite entity, and you'll see here we're kind of building out now, adding those additional blueprint schemas. So what I can do is in real time is, hey, maybe I want to go into this accounting schema. I'll load this one up in real time. And I'm actually going to go schema by schema just to give you the impression that there's no trickery behind the scenes. Certainly we are doing all this in real time as we're kind of running the demo, right? So I'll go ahead and load our entity schema, which is going to be customers, vendors, employees, sales reps, inventory, which is giving us item location level inventory levels for our NetSuite data. We also have our item table, right, which is kind of the item master within NetSuite. And again, if anyone here is familiar with NetSuite, the same thing I just showed on the EBS side definitely holds true, where what we're actually showing is the kind of the core transactional models behind this, right? So this is actually the security model. And I think I saw earlier on in the chat, there were questions around, do we handle row level security? So just to kind of put that to rest, we actually are here inheriting the roles and permissions from this ERP, which is NetSuite. And what we can do is through a series of, creating session variables and initializing those session variables when a user logs in, we can actually impart the same security that you have inside of your base ERP system inside of Incorta directly. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually loading our transaction tables, right? So this would be transactions, transaction lines, and anything else that NetSuite is storing around transactions. And then finally, I'll go ahead and load our some of these static and system tables. So as I'm waiting for this to load, right, it'll probably take about a minute or so. We've now gone through, I think, 8 or 9 different schemas in which we're still loading a couple of them, but what you'll see is we've already loaded this right in front of our eyes, right? So accounting, entity, all of this data has been loaded in real time from these schemas that have been imported from our blueprint. But if we talk about the blueprint as a whole, it's not just the schemas, right? So if I go into our transaction schema, it's not just this complexity that we've brought in of saying, okay, well, we have a transactions table, which joins out to transaction lines, to our customers, vendors, entities, right? That kind of complex relationships inside that complex business application. What's more important probably is this concept of a business schema. So keep in mind, I'm doing all this through the lens of a data analyst. And at the end of the day, my ability to not only bring in all of those schemas, but also this kind of middle semantic layer that says, well, hey, we've already kind of mapped all of the raw transactional tables, but then we've mapped them to like this middle curated layer where I have a set of core criteria coming from, frankly, all over the place inside that blueprint that gives me the ability to filter on things like, transaction status, account status, or account type. And then I have transaction level data, which is things like transaction number, transaction line ID, and others. I have a date table. I have an entity table with things like customers, vendors, and others. But at the end of the day, this is my ability as an end user to now kind of curate that data set. So if I want to say ship this off to my head of finance for him to build his own reports, he doesn't have to know the hundreds of thousands of tables that I may have brought in from a source system. He can go ahead and kind of, again, answer his own questions, which is what Incorta is really getting at. And as we've seen now, we've gone ahead and loaded this transactions table. So the next thing I can show you is on this NetSuite blueprint front, right? We have a set of dashboards that have also been imported. So if you were paying close attention, you would have seen that this NetSuite blueprint folder is also net new from what I loaded from our kind of cloud admin, right? So that includes things like executive dashboards, finance, sales order, operations, HR, and even some audit and admin. And if I just kind of go in and look at the first dashboard here, what we've done in a matter of minutes is gone from absolutely nothing related to NetSuite to importing our NetSuite blueprint, loading that data up in real time, and now getting operational analytics for someone at maybe the C level or the head of finance or head of sales. That'll give me access to things like, okay, well, what's revenue by year day? I can now drill into 2019, which looks like our highest, revenue year, and look at that. I also have a map similar to the one I already built out where I can look at by state revenue that's coming in, right? So maybe I want to go ahead and again filter on the highest state by revenue. And keep in mind, all this is being fed from those schemas that we just loaded in real time. And as I work my way down, right, I'm getting to things like, okay, well, what are the core customer types in this period of higher revenue in the state of highest contribution revenue? Who's my number one sales rep, which looks like an individual named Mary Redding, right? So as I'm continuing to filter and drill down, what I'm really getting to is this concept of transactional details down below, similar to what I've already built out. But now, again, I'm looking at 136 records that make up this point of view. And at the end of the day, this pre-built content is all kind of out there for me to come in and consume. But if you were to do this in, say, a traditional data warehouse or something like a NetSuite, which has its own kind of limited reporting capabilities, we're looking at an 8-table join across 5 different schemas as I run this report. But for an end user, especially someone who's more of a data consumer, right? They wouldn't really concern themselves with this. It's more coming in here and basically analyzing the data as it exists. But I'll kind of throw another wrench in this, right? So in this case, we're looking at accounts receivable data from EBS, which is obviously a complex ERP. Say we have another business unit which actually runs NetSuite, and maybe they run Salesforce as well. And maybe on the sales side, what we see a lot of our customers is things like you have a complex sales process. So things like issuing a quote and an opportunity and winning a deal all happens within my CRM, which is Salesforce, right? On the other side of that, I might have everything that happens in NetSuite from the second that opportunity closes in Salesforce, creates a sales order. Then we go through and actually, ship the order, issue the invoice, and actually receive the payment. So if you think of a complex business process like that happens across 2 separate systems, there's no way on the planet that anyone can answer that complex question with any tool that's really not Incorta, right? And what I'll show you here in a second is, if I go into the Salesforce schema, just to kind of bring this up to that 400 level course that I'd referred to earlier, I now have Salesforce data in here. And if I want to join this across, right, I can look at something like, okay, well, maybe I want to join my Salesforce data to my NetSuite data directly. So I can look at something like an opportunity that can join to a transaction. And in this case, I know the business, right? Maybe there's an integration that's already been built out where something like a sales order number inside NetSuite has been integrated into Salesforce. And from here, maybe I just want to join that on our transaction ID and click done. So not only have I brought in that blueprint, I've also integrated that with an existing source system that we've already brought into Incorta. And what you can see if I look at this diagram is, okay, well, now I've gone from opportunity to transactions. And the net of this is now I can actually answer a pretty complex business question, where if I go back into my visualizer, I can do something like look at my transaction table, right? And maybe what I'm interested in looking at in transactions, if I scroll down, is something like, let me go ahead and collapse these. If I expand out transactions, I can come down here to some transaction details. So maybe something like a transaction number and transaction date. Maybe I want to sort this by transaction date, right? So I'll see most recent transactions are actually taking place up top. Then I'll actually filter this really quickly by I'll actually filter this by just sales orders, right? So keep in mind this business process says when an opportunity in Salesforce is closed, it issues a sales order inside of NetSuite, right? So now I have a set of 13,000 or so NetSuite sales orders. And what I can actually take this and do from this is now start to build in some of that NetSuite data, or excuse me, Salesforce data. So if I look at something like an opportunity, right? If I find my opportunity table here, maybe I want to pull in something like my opportunity stage, right? So obviously you'd expect that all these are close won opportunities, given the fact that we've closed the deal and issued that sales order. But maybe I also want to pull in my amount from my Salesforce opportunity. But then if you kind of recall back to the situation that I'd set up, is it really all starts with a quote, because even in Salesforce, we're issuing things like customer quotes, where maybe I have a description of a quote, and I even have a subtotal that I can pull in, which I'll go ahead and just search for. So at the quote level, I can have a subtotal, but I also have a subtotal at my quote line level, right? So I can even go from my NetSuite sales order transaction to the quote line that we can tie out basically to the penny. And then maybe I'll also add something like a description of the quote line, just to kind of show that we're looking all the way from my originating transaction inside NetSuite, looking back to the Salesforce data, right? So as you see, we're looking at opportunity data, we're looking at quote data, quote line data. And if I look at that query plan, pretty interesting, right? Because now I've gone across systems and I'm looking at a complex business process that actually takes place across multiple systems. In addition to that, maybe I want to look at this table called product, which I'm capturing in Salesforce, that actually captures at the quote line level which products were actually included in that quote that were eventually passed on to the eventual customer, right? And then I can go the other way too. So maybe I want to go back to my NetSuite data and I want to look at my NS entity schema, which is going to give me everything from customers, sales reps, vendors. So maybe I want to pull in my customer table. Maybe I want to pull in my sales rep table. And I can go ahead and really quickly, I'll just search for this field called name. This is going to give me the full name of a customer. Oops, let me go ahead and close this window here. So now we have a customer. I can also pull in the sales rep who actually initially sold that deal. And what I have is actually a pretty interesting flattened analysis that I've gone from absolutely nothing on the NetSuite side. In 10 or so minutes, I now have the ability to basically monitor a super complex cross-system process. So I'm going from the originating kind of sales rep to the customer name, to the NetSuite sales order and the transaction date on which that deal actually closed, right? Then I'm going to the Salesforce opportunity amount, all the way through to the product that was issued on that quote line. And if I look at this complex query plan, that's what that business process looks like, right? Originating at the product and ending at the customer and the sales rep who actually were part of that deal. So to me, that's the real value of Incorta when we look at that kind of 300, 400 level concept is, of course, we can go from raw data in the context of data that's already been ingested into Incorta. But when I talk about speed in Incorta, I'm not just talking about the front end, right? I'm not talking about the billions of records. I'm not talking about just our ability to quickly implement the platform. I'm also talking about speed to change. So when you have a data analyst who's interested in pulling in a net new system, how quickly can that be done? And I think hopefully we've proven out that it's not only possible, it's extremely simplified and streamlined for a user who understands and can use Incorta as a platform with a little bit of training.